Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 20th chapter in the book of Matthew. We have 34 verses to cover, so we're not going to waste too much time with describing. It's actually not a preceding scene. I think an underappreciated fact is that the unfortunate marker of the chapter kind of divides the scene, but there's no indication of any break, so much of what we read earlier bleeds into the 20th chapter. Now, in the preceding character exchange in the same seed consisted of a rich young ruler who approached the master with all sincerity and curiosity about what he must do to inherit eternal life. And the master essentially exposes what he was not willing to do, which was to depart from his riches. He had identified the chink in his armor as the sin of covetousness. So his great possessions, this rich young ruler who upheld and enforced the law, was not living the law himself. He was attached to his riches, and that so he went away sad. But then he kind of talks about the disciple of the meaning in it all, and they ask. He tells them that a rich person, they're more likely. A camel's more likely to pass through the needle of an eye than a rich person is to make it to heaven. And his disciples say, "Who then can be saved?" And he says that all things with man that are impossible are possible with Elohim. So we ought not to discount or diminish any possibility that Elohim can work outside of our expectations to bring the unlikeliest of creatures to his eternal homeland. And then when the disciples, Peter being their spokesman, speaks for them and says, he says that they had forsaken all. They had left, as soon as they heard the call, whether they were fishermen or tax collectors, they dropped the nets, they dropped the change, and they came and followed him. So there was immediacy to the call, and Peter's telling him that he had valued what he had to offer, the heavenly treasure, more than the earthly treasure. And so the master kind of assures him. We're going to open by reading the 29th through the 30th verse of the 19th chapter. "And everyone who has left house or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or lands for my name's sake shall receive 100-fold and shall inherit eternal life." So the controlling element is for my name's sake. So if we lose, if we alienate from a family because we are derelict in cultivating that relationship, we have no one really to blame but ourselves for something like that. But if we endure the alienation of family and friends and loved ones in the world itself for his name's sakes, then everything we sacrifice will be restituted to us how many times? 100-fold. So everything we want is going to be supplied in excess abundance, and most importantly, we will inherit eternal life. Now, the question which prompts this is, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And he had it all wrong, because one cannot do anything or inherit eternal life. It's seriously a simple task, but that's not necessarily relevant. 30th verse, "But many who are first shall be last, and the last first." So this kind of establishes the momentum of these two verses, establishes what bleeds into the 20th verse. We're going to take it from the top, opening verse. "For the kingdom of the heaven is like a man, a householder, who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. And when he had agreed with the worker for a silver piece a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And he went about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marking place." So the third hour would have been 9 o'clock in the morning. The 6 o'clock marked the dawn of a new day. And he had a demand. He had a harvest beyond the supply. He had a limited supply for the demand of work that he needed to do. So what does he do? He goes out at progressive points, intervals in the day, to hire the workers who need to get it done. And, of course, the ones who are called first, spoiler alert, do not respond too well when they receive equal wages for doing the same labor, only for much, much longer. "And he said to them, 'You too go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I shall give you.' And they went. Having gone out again about the 6th and the 9th hour, he did likewise." So he repeats it at noon and 3 o'clock in the p.m., to once more fetch the needed labors, because the work is plenty, but the harvesters are few. So he's going out and getting the workers he has a demand that they're going to supply. He just doesn't have the right supply to meet the demand. So what does he do? He goes and gathers the human resources to get the job done. And about the 11th hour, having gone out, he found others standing idle, and said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one hired us." He said to them, "You too go into the vineyard, and whatever is right you shall receive." So these men weren't even looking for work. They weren't actively engaged. They were not, did not have any intention or visible motivation to do a day's labor. Yet this master asked them. He noticed they were idle, and from that he unleashed their more productive potential to harvest this vineyard of him. And they were called at the 11th hour, so that's pretty close to closing time. But these men were idle. They had nothing to do, and he wanted to get as many people while he could have them to get what he wanted to get done. And evening came, and the master of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last to the first." So he's gonna the ones who showed up first are gonna be paid first, but they're not gonna be paid the same amount. So the manager would have been the steward, or the main subordinate or lieutenant, who would have watched over a vineyard for a master's behalf. And when those came who were hired about the 11th hour, they each received a silver piece. A silver piece was a denarius. This was the day's wage of a Roman soldier and the Roman workman. So that's just the amount they received, a full day's labor for perhaps an hour or two of actual labor. And this ticks off the people who are there since 9 in the morning, or even earlier, because they had been sweating and toiling for a longer hour of time, so they cannot fathom why they are being paid the same amount. But it will get the answer when he gets to them. And when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but they too received each a silver piece. So the first comers are kind of disappointed to be on the receiving end of an equal amount to those who they saw came after them. They had been sweating and toiling all day in the sun, while these sort of strags just kind of tagged along, scattered throughout the day, but they had been there since the beginning. So why are they receiving the same amount when they did a day's labor? And he was just a generous master. They couldn't fathom that. And when they received it, they grumbled against the householder, saying, "These last have worked 1 hour, and you made them equal to us, who have borne the burden and heat of the day." So they're taking it kind of personal, because, the working environment and climate was not the most hospitable in where they were. So, it would have been summertime and a lot of backbreaking labor, sweat and pouring everywhere, because they had done a full day's of work in the field, and they're sweating like pigs to see these people who are barely even perspiring receiving the same amount of wages for them, even though they did less work. But he answering said to one of them, "Friend, I do you no wrong. Do you not agree with me for a silver piece?" So these earlier workers had actually signed a contract to do a day's labor for the expected sum of money, but the latter stragglers didn't even enter into any contract. They just kind of accepted with the faith that the master would pay them what he saw fit. So these men are getting exactly what they had signed up for, exactly what they had asked for. He had honored his end of the contract. Now his money remains him to do what he wills, so who are they to tell him what to do with his abundance? "Take yours and go, but I want to give the last man also to you." That's his prerogative. He paid them. He has reserved the right to pay the wages that he sees fit, and if he sees fit to be more generous to those who had came late in the day, that is totally up to him. It's not usual, it's not normal, but it is legitimate as it's written in this book. This is an analogy and a metaphor to the heaven. The idea communicating sums up with the first verse of what we read, the 30th verse of the previous chapter. "Many who are first shall be last, and the last shall be first." So the people who had showed up last are getting first in terms of benefit, but those who had been there first are considering themselves last or left out. Is it not right for me to do what I want with my own, or are your eyes evil because I am good? So he's challenging their right to even challenge him to do what belongs to him, what he owns, he possesses, that is his to do with as he wills and as he sees fit. And they have no right or claim to diminish his generosity to others when they had entered into a staple professional relationship of a work for a day's wage, and he saw fit to give the same people the same amount of money. That's the litany of the complaint, but it all ties into the lesson, which leaves the story leaves with, "Thus the last shall be first, and the first last. For many are called, but few are chosen." Many are called, and few are chosen. So in the previous chapter, for example, we witness the Messiah saying the same things that he said to Matthew and all the other disciples to the rich young ruler who had rejected his message and his answer. He had given him the answer to his question of what must I do to inherit eternal salvation. He says, I'm right here. Just drop everything, sell everything you own, follow me, and you will have what you asked for. But he was not willing to pay the price. So he was one who had received the call, but he was not chosen. And to be many are called and few are chosen, that's because many do not choose to hear the call. So whether you know it or not, whether you realize it or not, God is calling you, and he does have a plan for you, and he wants you to draw closer to him in order to figure out what it is and what you need to do to get to the goal. So once more, many are called, few are chosen. I wish everyone who was called were chosen, but that's just not the way it is, and we have no right to contest the exercise of his judgment, because he will have mercy on who he has mercy on, and he will execute judgment on him who he deems not fit to be spared of his divine wrath. And there's nothing we can do about it, nothing we can protest. We just have to accept the justice that he sees fit to administer to us with faith and trust that it is fair because it is from him, and therefore it is good and perfect and true. And Yahshua, going up to Jerusalem, took the 12 disciples aside on the way and said to them, so here we find, after laying the parable, this is a distinct break in scenery. So he had the latter parable had kind of blended into the lesson that he gave the apostles. Now they're on the move, they're marching, they're going towards Jerusalem, and they're walking with him, but he's not teaching them, but he pulls them aside to teach them. And he said to them, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be delivered up to the chief priests and to the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death, and deliver him to the Gentiles, to mock and to flog and to crucify, and at the third day he shall be raised." So he knows what he's marching into, what he has to do, what is coming up against him. The cross was ever before him when he said, "My time is not yet," at the wedding feast of Cana, early in his ministry. He was referring to his time, the time that he came to pay the price and bear the penalty of our sin and pay the price of our salvation. So we are bought and sealed with the precious, priceless blood of the one who bled for us. He bore our punishment that we are due, but he all knew it must come to pass. And what's interesting here is that even though the Jews, the ones who will condemn him to death, will turn them over to the full might of the Roman Empire. That means crucifixion. So they're not content to stone him to death. They want to add insult to injury by crucifying, mocking him, spitting on him, belittling him, and just doing what they did. It's really sick to describe even what they did to him. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came to him with her sons, bowing down and making a request of him. Mother of the sons of Zebedee, that would have been Zebedee's wife. They're John and James's father, so by connection she is their mother. She's not named, but we do know that her husband is named, and her two children are Andrew the elder and John the younger. John is the beloved disciple. Andrew was the first martyred. We read of in Acts 12:2. John was the only one of the apostles who escaped the martyr's crown, and largely because it takes us to John 21. We don't even want to go there. But so what does this woman say? And he said to her, "What do you want?" And she said to him, "Command that these 2 sons of mine might sit, one on your right hand and the other on the left, in your reign." So she's asking him an extraordinary and presumptuous request, because as the master determines his wages and gives the gift of the kingdom to whom he sees fit, it is also him to determine who sits. It's not up to him, as he eventually reveals, to determine who sits in the throne. That is something that his Father determined, so it's not even appropriate for them to question. They are missing the whole meaning of the purpose for which they are called and chosen to be his disciples at this time. But Yahweh answering said, "You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink, and to be baptized with the baptized I am baptized with?" They said to him, "We are able." And the reason they said we are able is because they did not know the cup which would come to pass. He had warned them throughout all gospel accounts that he must suffer and die, and the apostles weren't paying attention. They consistently neglected to heed its calling, so it kind of took them as a surprise as they walked into Jerusalem. They were with him when the king rode in on his donkey and was greeted with palms, and the whole city was in high expectation. And of course, the week did not end well for him. But that is the cup that he has to come and pass. That's the cup he prays about in Gethsemane when he says, "Father, let this cup pass from me." His flesh was screaming out to skip the pain of being spit on, mocked, belittled, flogged with whips with blades in them before you were hung up on a tree, nailed while you suffocated, dehydrated, and died. So crucifixion is not something pleasant, but it also gives meaning to our salvation. And they clearly were not yet willing to pay the price. Eventually they did. John was beheaded, I think, by Herod Antipas, James was the first martyred apostle, and John, according to legend, was thrown into a pot of boiling water, yet miraculously survived. And he said to them, "You shall indeed drink my cup, and you shall be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with. But to sit on my right hand and on my feet is not mine to give, but it is for those to whom it has been prepared by my Father." So we're going to break this down into 2 halves. The first half, he speaks of the baptism in the cup. So he likens his blood-stained cross to a baptism of sorts. He had been baptized by water, but now he's going to be baptized by blood. And through that blood, we have our propitiation, which enables us to come to heaven, and we might not make it to the right hand of his throne, but that's not really up to us, or it's only up to the Father, and Yahshua is almost indifferent to who makes it there. He is here and now, at least in this moment in time, trying to bring men up there with him. And when the 10 heard it, they were displeased at the 2 brothers. So of the 12, 10 of them were not sons of Zebedee. So the 10 other disciples are provoked at having heard this, what they requested, because they were scheming and weaseling at their expense, behind their backs seemingly. But Yahshua called them near and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles are masters over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them." So he's displaying and instructing as an example the way of the world, the way of the Gentiles who rule over the worldly system, the satanic worldly system. Their ways is to be served and not to be a servant, but he reverses and flips it upside down in the paradox of which we will read. Where was I? Okay. But it shall not be so among you, but whoever wants to be great among you, let him become your servant. So servant ministry is the paradox embodied and exemplified most masterfully by the Master himself, who was in every way a servant. He washed his disciples' feet. He healed the sick. That was a service. He preached. He taught. Everything he did was a service, so he did not exalt himself at the expense of the masses. He became a servant to paradoxically uplift others. So as it was with him, it must be with us. So if we want to, have the choicest blessings to be first among you, you have to become a servant. You can't be scheming your way up to the top of the ladder like a politician. Even as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So the Son proved his servanthood all the way to the cross. That is something we cannot duplicate. It is his gift to us, and that is not something we should be taking lightly, because it offers us life eternal. He bore the penalty we must otherwise endure. Had he not gone to the cross and paid the way, there would be literally no way for us to make it to heaven, and he became our ransom. Ransom is a term of release of slave, but it's also someone who's given as collateral. So he was given as collateral for our sin on the cross. And as they were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. So Jericho is their location. In Luke's account, they're in the 19th chapter at this point. In Luke's account, we read of Zacchaeus, but we did one on that recently. You can type in Corey Johnston, Luke 19, 1 through 10, after you're done over here. And so what do they encounter on the way to Jericho? And see 2 blind men sitting by the way, having heard that Yeshua was passing by, cried out, saying, "Have mercy on us, O Master, Son of David." So these 2 blind men were clearly in need. They had a physical handicap that disabled them from earning or collecting or doing anything but begging. These were the only professional options for the blind and handicapped in the ancient world, was to be reduced to the penury and to beg. So they're asking for mercy. And tragically, the crowd around them do not want them to receive what they ask. They consider them too insignificant to be even worth the master's time. And the disciples do this too with children. They kind of try and shoo them away, but he hushes them and tells them to bring them unto me, and forbid not any man from bringing them unto me, because they are an example and an embodiment of how we inherit eternal life. It's like into a childlike attitude in other passages. And the crowd rebuked them that they should be silent, but they cried out over all the more, saying, "Have mercy on us, O Master, Son of David." So these men were not about to give up, because their once-in-a-lifetime opportunity was literally before them. So what did they do? They cried louder, even as they were tried to be drowned out by the voices against them. And they cried just loud enough to catch the attention of the one they had called. So the Son of David they recognize that he was the Messiah. He was the promised hope of expectation. They may have been blind, but they weren't blind of prophecy. So they knew, they had faith without seeing. So this is very much an act of faith to even know that he's here. They use their spiritual senses to intuit that he was gathered in their midst. And Yeshua stopped and called them and said, "What do you want me to do for you?" So he's got their attention, and he's asking what does he want to do for them. And of course their most pressing need is to have their sight restored so they can enjoy life, because life of the blind is not enviable. It's not to suggest that a blind life can not be meaningful. It's just to say no one really wants to live life that way. So we do have mercy and pity on those who do not. They said to him, "Adonai, Master, that our eyes be open." So they're asking their most obvious pressing need, and because their faith in him was sufficient to unlock his miraculous manifestation of his miraculous powers. And having been moved with mercy, Yeshua touched their eyes, and immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him. So the word mercy frequents a lot of, they motivate a lot of the miracles we read, especially in Mark's account. I noticed it there, where a lot of the reasons he did what he did was motivated by mercy, pity, compassion, however you want to translate it. And that was very much the servant leader ideal that he embodied and personified in perfected form, and he is ever before us and above us as the worthiest example of emulation. So to be a disciple is to mimic the master. I hope that's the reason you're here, and I hope I'm mimicking the way of the master sufficiently to inspire whoever sees these to, be better people and know more than they previously knew about divinity and theology. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.